Coming up on this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast.
You started a business in the last year. You have 3 kids at home and a family. How have you been able to juggle all those successfully?
I always make a point to put them first. The company and business, it'll never be the forefront of my life.
Typically, when you hit those funks or when you hit those places where you need to get that mojo back, how do you get through that?
I do a lot of things outside of work.
Welcome to the Elite Recruiter Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena, where we focus on what it takes to win in the recruiting game. We cover it all from sales, marketing, mindset, money, leadership, and placements.
This episode is brought to you by Remote Assistants, the go-to partner for recruiters who are done wasting time on operations, sourcing, or marketing. Their remote assistants are pre-vetted and fully trained for an entire 4 months. We're talking sourcing, candidate follow-up, back-end automation, marketing support, all the things that pull you away from actually growing your business. So if you're serious about scaling your agency and want to buy back your time with real plug-and-play talent, go to www.remoteassistants.ai and get matched in under 48 hours.
I am so excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. And here's the thing. When you get laid off, you have decisions to make. Do you go get another job? Do you go start your own firm? Do you just take a break for a while and head over to Europe and enjoy some wine? But here's the thing, starting your own firm is hard as heck. It requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of capital. To go from zero to start or zero to 60 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, it requires tons of effort. And for many people, that start actually never really gets off the ground. But what if there's a way to actually get off the ground with your start, the launch of your business? What if you looked at the route of getting investors? Could those investors, people that have done it before, invest in you, give you enough wiggle room to run, give you the mentorship to grow, to really have a successful firm? And that's one of the things that I'm so excited to talk about today. Is we're going to talk with Zach, who's been in the recruiting industry for a while, faced exactly that, and then made a decision and jumped on it. So Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Benjamin.
Real quick, before we start doing a deep dive in everything, quick 30 seconds about your company right now.
Yeah, so, started Keen Search and Staffing about a year ago now, a little over a year. And yeah, we've been rocking and rolling. I started it and, been in the industry, like you said, for over 10 years. And now, we're really starting to get our gears going and make a stand in the market. So yeah, things are going pretty well so far.
That is awesome. So before we start walking into the story of how you got to where you are now and where you're going in the future,
right?
How do you even end up in this wonderful world of recruiting?
Yeah, sure. Well, and also first off, thanks for having me on your podcast. We listened to it quite a bit and excited to be here. So whenever I first got into recruiting, actually I'm a music major. So got out of school and taught guitar for a while, did some retail and, had my first kid. So needed to make a little extra money. So went and started working in a warehouse, oil and gas company, moved up into inside sales, and then was unfortunately laid off in 2014 and had to find another position. So I went to a recruiting agency to apply for a inside sales rep job. Ended up working for the company. Didn't even, I think, get presented to that client. And that's kind of where I started out. I did light industrial staffing. So this was back in probably 2015, 2016. And I really got my feet wet, selling light industrial. I would go business to business in the 100-degree heat in the summer and, knock on warehouse doors and ask if they needed help with a forklift driver, things like that, so it was a lot.
So you weren't just cold calling, you were actually going literally door to door.
Right. Yeah. And I thought that was the way to do it, because I wasn't picking up the phone to us because I guess warehouse workers, they're not on the phone all the time. They're out on the warehouse floor. So a lot of times, I would go to the receptionist, talk to them. But I mean, if the warehouse was back there, I would just go straight to the warehouse and be like, hey, who's in charge? Drop off my business card. And then maybe when I get back to the office in the afternoon, start making phone calls. So by that time, I had my MBA because I went back to school, to get more into the business field. So after a year of that light industrial, I met a guy that worked at the largest staffing agency in the world and gotten more into professional services and started it's kind of doing the same thing, except you're making calls to accounting managers and placing staff accountants, senior accountants, things like that. So really made an impact on the Houston branch here. And that's kind of how I started in staffing, and I enjoy it quite a bit.
Real quick, for those listening, like
Huh.
you've always been on the sales side of it.
Yeah, I actually never, I mean, I've recruited, I've made referrals and things like that to recruiters, but I've always worked a split desk, always been business development, sales. So, really starting my own company, I have to jump into recruiting. I have to jump into perm. When I was doing business development, I was always staffing or contract and would place contractors and then flip direct hire to full desk recruiters. But, nowadays I'm recruiting, I'm working the perm jobs and things like that, but always have been on the sales side.
I think that's like an interesting thing. Like I've only seen it a few times in the conversations I have. So often
Uh-huh.
people start as the recruiter and then they like finally work their way up to the sales side. And if sales is almost a promotion, you've skipped that, which we kind of had this conversation offline. You're like, you've working with recruiters and hiring recruiters to do that. And like many times, like you already have the strength that many recruiters probably should have, which is phenomenal.
Right. I always enjoyed sales too, reaching out to people and helping out their business. So yeah, I kind of wish I did do more recruiting when I started out, just to understand, that dynamic, because it's so different, the longer conversations and all sorts of stuff. So
Awesome. And then unfortunately you faced the day where you got laid off.
right. Yeah. I mean, it happens, different companies do layoffs and everything and restructuring. So yeah, I found myself, without a job about a year ago, and I can't go to Europe and have wine and lose income. I got 3 kids now. So basically I, applied for a couple of jobs, talked to some different companies, and ultimately also spoke with some investors that were interested in me starting a business, and decided to go that route, jumping feet first and putting my blood, sweat, and tears into this company just to, see what else is out there. I think it's important to take risks after a while, especially if you've been in the industry for a while.
I mean, it is one of those things like you know how to do the sales, which is probably one of the toughest things. You've done the staffing, which is hard. But let me just take a few steps back. Like, were you initially looking for investors or how did you find them?
Yeah. So basically, they found me through a search firm. And, I was honestly pretty hesitant at first. I have an MBA, so I understand business plans and getting investors and things like that. But, after meeting the guys and getting to know them, I felt a lot more comfortable, getting that mentorship and going into having my own business. When I saw contract, I saw a lot of contract business. So that actually takes a lot of capital up front to pay the contractor and everything. And it helps to know that, bills are going to get paid and everything whenever you're starting out, so you can get that runway. I don't think I could have done it without, having investors, just because, I got to pay the bills every month.
Having your kids, having a house, having
Right.
a full thing. So when you were like analyzing the different options that you had, you said you've talked to a few other search firms, and it sounds like you, like on the sales side, you probably could have got picked up super fast. What was one of the most enticing things about actually like launching your own business with a team behind you?
Right. Well, I think I don't want to say there's a lot of, companies that don't do the right thing. I mean, I've always enjoyed, finding out different way that companies do business, but I like the idea of being able to market myself and do marketing myself, sales myself, and, just create something that is a little bit different. Whenever we started, we really wanted to focus on, authenticity and making sure we have an inclusive environment. And I think that, is still the case nowadays, but I think I've always wanted to kind of take a hold of things myself and, create something from what I've learned over the past decade in this industry. So I think ultimately that was what helped me make the decision. I've never started a business as well. I've never been the leader. So I wanted to take that risk and at least try it out, and I really made a good choice in starting the business for sure.
And so, if you're sitting there talking with somebody that's actually kind of like running into a situation like you, like, I want to start something.
Uh-huh.
Should I go figure everything out myself? Or is it worth to have the mentorship and the investment behind you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth it to have the mentorship, especially if you we're just a salesperson or a recruiter, I think having the mentorship of someone that has done it before, has ran a business before, seen the ups and downs of what can happen, there's a lot that goes to it as far as, creating the business and hiring and, finding the right people, looking for the right people for your business. So that helps immensely. And then, just being able to ask questions and, get feedback on some of your decisions, it really helps out a lot.
Awesome. And so you launched the business, you got it off the ground about a year ago. How did you first get your first few clients? Like, what did you do?
Yeah. So, like I said, I've been in the Houston market for about 10 years, and it's just doing what I've always done, making calls, seeing if people need help with their searches. I think my first couple of clients, they were job ads. I saw a couple of accounting positions open and just made a call to the CFO and said, "Hey, do you need help with those positions?" And sure enough, they had a couple of contract roles that we were able to get filled, and I think we got our insurance for contract like that week, to make sure everything was set up and everything. So it happened fast and, just haven't looked back.
So in these first few clients, like you've worked for some probably the largest brands in the recruiting world.
hmm
It's something like I always talk about in the GovCon sector. Like, did you have to market yourself different?
I think, it was a little different. A couple of clients, they know my name just from being in the industry and calling them, so much for the past 10 years. I think it's about, bumping your chest out and showing that you can offer kind of the same services just on a different scale. Some of these big brands, they usually have little sectors of like, this is interim accounting or this is an engineering group. And really it's the same size, 4 to 8 people delivering the services. So it's kind of just on a smaller scale, but I'm still doing the same sort of calling and offering the same quality that, you can offer from those big brands.
For the listeners, like
hmm
at the end of the day, do those managers really care about
Uh,
about the big name or not?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you get the right people in place, I don't think they really care. Yeah.
And so we talked about this offline. Like when you launched the company, like your game plan was almost everywhere, right? Like focusing on
Yeah,
business everywhere.
right. Yeah, right now, I mean, we do a little bit, mainly focus on accounting and finance, but like I said, when I was always doing contract work, but our first couple of hires were more perm recruiters. So I kind of did get more direct hire roles just because it's a different pace and everything. So, but this year, going to go really hard on getting more contract positions and also engineering and technical roles. I think AI and automation have really kind of shrank the accounting teams of a lot of big companies. Like I used to be able to place like 4 APAR people at a time on contract, but a lot of accounting teams are consolidating or offshoring. So we're looking at more technical positions. But I think, we cast a wide net when we started just to get business. But, as we start finding different sectors that are hiring, we start niching down a little bit. So really focusing on, staying in accounting and finance, but really looking at technical roles as well now.
Okay. And are you really like focused on the Houston market?
Right now I am, yeah. I think even when we started, that's another thing. Having an investor, it helps to take risk and see what's out there. Last year we did a lot. We were kind of national, like, hey, we could fill any job. We had a lot of Florida roles and all over Texas. But right now, we're really focusing on the Houston market and making sure that that grows. But we'll still work in different markets across Texas.
And what point did you realize you had to kind of like go from national to more local?
I guess, whenever we started getting, I guess we didn't know the markets. I think, especially in the contract business, you want to have a pipeline of candidates, and that's just because it's so fast. So I think really focusing on the Houston market, we're able to recruit people and have them kind of on a bench, so to speak. So that way, whenever someone does have an open opportunity, we can, look at our database and find people. Whereas if you're working in different markets with such a small team, you don't really have the pipeline. So, it takes longer to fill roles. And I think that's kind of a thing we tripped on. We need to get more focused on one city or one niche so we can really run that market.
Mm. You initially had to grow and find a recruiter, right? Because of the
Right.
growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we have 3 recruiters now, but yeah, initially, we had to find someone because I honestly, I wasn't the best recruiter. So we had to find, a couple people to help some of my business development efforts to find candidates. Absolutely.
How did you find your first recruiter and like what'd you have to go through?
So yeah, I mean, I just basically made a call to, and she was available on the market and kind of just said, hey, we're starting this business. I have, some investors that are interested in, just trying to grow. And, I think it takes a certain person to join a startup because, if you're working with large companies, there's databases that already have candidates set up, and clients as well that you can just go off of. But, with a new company, it's all starting from scratch. You kind of have to have a little more, entrepreneur spirit to join a startup because, you're going to be finding people and putting them in the system, and there's not much, you know, history to fall back on. Whenever I worked for different larger companies, I would go back and say, who did we work with 2 years ago and just call them up, but starting from scratch, you got to go out and find the business and create new relationships.
Now that you've hired your third recruiter, like how have you learned about how to set up those systems to set up those recruiters for success?
Yeah. So first of all, make sure, the person is willing to be an entrepreneur. And, I think it takes a certain person, but, set them up for success as in, set up their system and everything, but just make sure that they are ready to go, because it does take a certain type of person.
Three recruiters now with yourself as a salesperson, the Rainmaker, that's incredible
Right.
growth for like a year.
We've been working, pretty hard. And I think the market's really starting to turn now. Last year, with the election and everything and being in oil and gas, there was a lot of people staying put and not willing to move. So a lot of times we were getting jobs, but not finding the right people just because people were not wanting to move. But, nowadays, I think there's more movement in the market here in Houston. So
And I want to delve into this. You said things were a little slower prior to the election. Things are picking up speed now and you guys are growing. What is actually working for business development?
well, I mean, 10 years ago, it was cold calling. I was told to make 50 calls a day and not leave the office unless I'm going to lunch. Then we had the pandemic and everyone was working remote. And I don't think there really is a game plan anymore on what the best way is to do business development. You have to like kind of be one step ahead. I'm trying to do a lot of marketing on LinkedIn and still making, business development calls, finding, leaders of companies locally and making calls and offering our services, offering candidates that we're working with. And, I think you have to be on top of email marketing as well. It's definitely different than it was, and everything moves so fast nowadays. People are looking for, our clients are looking for skill sets. And if the candidate doesn't match all the boxes, they're usually not that interested. Whereas, before a lot of clients were interested in training or, taking a chance on people. So you just got to be buttoned up and make sure you provide the right candidates.
The Elite Recruiter Podcast has multiple summits coming up that you need to make sure that you are registered for. We have the AI Recruiting Summit 2025 coming up. And on top of that, finish the year strong. These two summits are going to help you move the needle, help you achieve your goals, help you achieve your dreams, and make 2025 the year that you started out and you wanted it to be. Make sure you get registered and also stay tuned. We got something cooking for you guys. Working on another project that you guys are going to absolutely love. All right. See you guys at the summits and see you guys soon. How much percentage wise would you say like new business and closed business have you gotten from cold calling versus like email or LinkedIn or other places?
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand because I mean, when you're posted on LinkedIn all the time, your brand is getting shown. And I think that makes people more likely to answer the phone and talk to you. Whereas, if you're just making calls all the time and no one knows your new brand, they probably won't answer the phone or hang up on you. So I'm trying to make sure people know that we're here, we're working, we're competent, and then, connecting with them however I can. But I do a lot of like LinkedIn in mails and things like that as well, because everyone is different on how they want to be sold to, and there's so many like scam calls nowadays. So it's difficult to get people on the phone.
If you want a good laugh, scam calls. Since we've started hitting record, I've already had two hit my phone.
Oh, wow. Really?
Well, and that's why I was like,
Yeah.
because you're talking about making calls and they're like, I know like I mean, I also work in GovCon and people work in Skiff. So like, I don't do as much cold calling as I probably should, but if it works, it works. And I want people to know that like
Yeah.
the phone still works. It's a secret
Right.
weapon.
It's just second nature to me. I guess I'm old school now, even though, I'm a millennial, but I understand, the younger Gen Z, they don't like the phone at all. But that's kind of what I was trained on. So like if I'm not making calls, I feel like I'm not working. It's just kind of second nature to me now to pick up the phone and try, leave voicemails and things like that.
Well, talking about work, like, what kind of KPIs do you hold yourself to since you've like had success kind of coming out of the gate?
Right. I still try to make at least, 20, 30 calls a day, whether that's, to candidates, prepping them, things like that, and doing business development. But, as far as job orders, I'll still, try to get 2 to 3 a week to whether it's contract or direct hire. And, I'm also not a big fan of KPIs.
Okay.
I want to hire people that are willing to work and, however they do. I have some people that will find candidates through email and then start texting them, but then, they may have like one phone call with them or have a Zoom meeting to, have a quick interview. But, I'm not going to be someone that micromanages and makes sure, we're all professionals and, I have a hybrid schedule. People will come in 2 or 3 times a week and then, I just trust that they're doing their job. And, I'm only trying to hire, seasoned recruiters that understand the market and everything. I want to give someone a chance, but I just don't think we're there yet to hire like an entry level person. And I think that's, with a startup, that's kind of what you have to do because we got to make money before we can, really hire just a ton of people.
When hiring your recruiters, you're typically looking for people that like know about recruiting, the ins and outs. And
Right.
you're not looking at the college train them up model of some of these other places.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you even like think about that at all? Or was it just like, I'm hiring people that know what they're doing right out of the gate?
Yeah. That's kind of what I thought of because they understand the market. They understand the ebbs and flows, especially right now. I think it's still kind of a difficult market to break into. And I think someone that understands how the staffing world was, before the pandemic and then now, they're going to have a much better idea of what needs to be done to make business happen, So
That's awesome and fun. But at the same time, I'm always just like, I know some of those like college shops, they just burn through people so fast just to get
Right.
one.
Don't get me wrong, I would hire the right person, but it takes a lot of capital too to burn through all those college kids, that are straight out of college. Because I've seen it. I've seen it. Yeah.
Now that you get your first year done, you've kind of like figured out that you want to focus more locally and then in Texas compared to the national focus that you had your first year. The focus is staffing. You've got a team of 3 recruiters now. What does the future look like?
Yeah. So I think, after we really get the Houston market, probably go into Dallas. And, I think there's a good market there. I don't know that market as well as Houston. And I found that out, there's different cultures and just different way of doing work out there. So I think the future is, getting more people and, filling up. Right now we're in a shared office space. There's a couple more offices here, just make sure we get the right people. I think that's really key in a startup is to get the right people in place and then just kind of grow it. I think hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be, maybe 7+ internal employees. And I think, keeping the culture is very important as well, making sure that we stick to our values and kind of go from there. And then, after 5 years, I'm hoping we're really rocking and rolling.
Okay, before we jump over the quick fire questions, you're looking at 7 employees internal by the end of year 2.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at 5 years rocking and rolling. If you did not actually like take the route of investor money, but you still thought about like starting your own business, do you think you'd be anywhere close to where you're at right now?
I don't think so. No, because I would probably be like one of those sole recruiters, because it's a risk to hire more people because that's the highest cost to running a business is wages, So I definitely don't think so because you gotta, have that capital to help hire and keep it going. Absolutely.
How many years would you think it would have taken you to get to where you are now without the investment?
I don't know. Probably over 10 years, but who knows? Because, the market changes all the time. I don't even know if I would be able to.
I have not met very many people that have gone the route, but it's
Hmm.
one of the things that I have seen for people that have gone that route with the right mentorship and the right investors is it's worked well and they've grown and then sold.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think, if things get down the line where if we sell, I'll probably start another business, and do it again because I like helping clients and going from there. So
Your fun is helping clients. I just absolutely love that. Before we jump over to the quick fire questions, is there anything that else you want to share when it comes to like launching and starting your business and everything that you've done within your first year?
I mean, I think you have to have a self-discipline, because you don't have a manager sitting next to you that will talk to you about KPIs. You kind of have to create your own KPIs and just keep a good head on your shoulders and make sure you're doing the right thing. I think having integrity and good ethics is kind of required to starting a staffing business because, there's a lot of red tape that can happen too. You got to have your LLC and good insurance and everything. We use a PEO to help make sure we're compliant with everything. So I think if you want to start your own business, you have to really understand it's going to be a grind, the first couple of years for sure.
I love that. Well, jumping over to the quick fire questions, and they don't need to be quick answers.
Okay.
If you have a brand new recruiter or somebody that's jumping into the industry this year in 2025 and they come up to you and like, hey, what kind of advice would you give me to have a successful career? What would you tell them?
I'll tell them, don't do it. No, I'm just joking. Uh, I would tell them that there's, a lot of highs and lows in recruiting. You get a placement, you feel like you're on top of the world, but then if the next couple of weeks you don't make a placement, you're going to be, pretty down. So I would, say you got to be, tenacious and tough, take a lot of no's and, just keep grinding. If you're on the recruiting side, you got to, start building relationships and not be afraid, to pick up the phone and get to know people. It's a fast-paced environment as well. I think a lot of people that get into recruiting, they're used to being in roles where it's not so fast-paced. And, to be competitive in this industry, you have to make a lot of placements and have volume. And that requires, critical thinking and making sure you're staying on top of things. So that's kind of the advice I would give.
Same question, but for somebody that's been around the block a decade, 2 decades, what advice would you give that person?
Someone who's been around for a couple decades?
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say learn from your mistakes. You're going to, make mistakes in this business, whether it's, sending a candidate that doesn't really make sense for a role or, sending something wrong. And, you just got to learn from your mistakes and keep going. And, you don't know what the future holds. And there's so many outside forces that affect our industry as well. So you got to be adaptable. How things were 5 years ago are probably different now. And, keep chasing the right jobs that will help, make money.
Has there been a book that's had a huge impact on your personal career and success?
Yeah, there has. I can't think of the name, but it's this book. It's about mojo, like find your mojo. That kind of helped me out quite a bit because basically you can get down yourself and I think it's called Finding Your Mojo or Who Stole My Mojo? Get it back and live or something. So like, especially in sales, because I've been in sales and may close a lot of deals and stuff. And then you could be down for a little bit. And that book helped me, realize how to get my mojo back and, get back to where I'm, in that sales mindset where you're kind of, just being successful and helping people out. Because if you're not practicing, having your mojo, you could be down for a while and keep hitting losses, which you want to get out of pretty quick.
Typically, when you hit those funks or when you hit those places where you need to get that mojo back, like how do you get through that?
I do a lot of things outside of work. Like I inline skate like 30 miles a week with a group here. So that helps me getting away from the computer and not looking at my phone for a couple hours while I'm skating. I play guitar. And I think just getting away from everything, from all work, helps me just kind of take a breath and realize, the funk you're in at work isn't your whole life. So I like doing that and then just coming back and being refreshed and getting back to what I do best.
You started a business in the last year. You have 3 kids at home and a family. How have you been able to juggle all those successfully?
Yeah, so I mean, my office is, fairly close to the house. When I get home, 2 of them are in school already, so I'll come home and after work have dinner and everything and spend time with them. Sometimes I'll, do my prep like for the next day after they go to bed. I always make a point to put them first. The company and business, it'll never be the forefront of my life. I'm always putting family first, and that's kind of the priority. And hanging out with my kids and going to t-ball practice or gymnastics, that refreshes me also. And making sure my kids are happy and everything, that gets me going. There's been no neglect for sure, and it's been nice, to be able to.
It sounds like it's even like revitalizing you too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever I started in this business, going, like mentioned, 100-degree heat, I mean, it's to feed my kids, that motivates me. I'd always have a picture of my family and, I'd look at them, and if I didn't want to do that, because I'm an introverted person and making calls all day it's difficult, especially at first, but you got to do what you got to do.
You just said that you're introverted,
Yeah.
but you decided to hop on a podcast with me.
Right.
Is this outside of your comfort zone?
I mean, a little bit, yeah, but I think you could train yourself to, even if you're introverted, to do things outside of your comfort zone. Absolutely.
Well,
So used to it now.
And that's one of the things I want to ask is like, I've seen some major billers that are just like the most introverted people,
Right.
like big, like both on the staffing, both on the search side, just absolutely crushing. I think like one I met is like had a $3 million a year recently. How did you get over in such a business where we have to literally talk all the time?
Right.
How did you like teach yourself and get over some of the things that you had to learn to have this success in recruiting?
Yeah, I think it's just practice, and honestly, I think introvert personalities, they come across as not salesy. So I think it actually makes clients let their guard down a little bit more than an extroverted salesperson. And I think it's just practice, because at first I think I had a persona where, you have this business. It's almost like acting. I started acting a lot recently, but I think when I first got into the industry, I had this like Wolf of Wall Street persona or something. I just be like, "Hey, how's it going?" It wasn't me. But over the years, I've got more authentic with myself, and I think just over the years, I kind of just came out of my shell a little bit, and am able to talk to clients and be myself.
We had the Wolf of Wall Street. I love that.
Well, that's when it came out, and
I was just like,
and that's how it was too. Back in those days, there was a bullpen, at all the agencies, and I mean, there probably still is, but that's just how it was. 10 years ago, it was almost like a bullpen Wolf of Wall Street type mentality in agencies.
and you said you like really leaned into your own personal authenticity.
Uh-huh.
And has that really helped on the sales side?
I think so. Yeah. I like to ask clients, about their families and what they like to do for fun. Whenever I first started in the business, I would talk 95%, business and 5%, personal. But now it might be even 50-50, depending on the person, just because, like I said, work life isn't at the forefront of everything, especially, after the pandemic. I think a lot of people realized, there's so much more to life than work. So yeah, I definitely open up to a lot of my clients and talk about, personal things as opposed to just business.
Well, and I want to kind of, wrap it up with this, but like, I want to take you back with everything that you know now with your own company, the years in staffing and recruiting. If you got a chance to go sit down with little Zach, who just started in the recruiting world and had a good conversation with yourself, what kind of advice would you give yourself at the very beginning of your recruiting career?
I think it would be to ask open-ended questions for sure. I think whenever I first start, I'd be like, I'd ask yes, no questions, but I think not letting things get to you so much. Cause when I first started, got hung up on things like that. People told me I'm not competent. And I think I just had my training wheels on, but I would tell myself, to keep going and don't take the lows so low and don't take the highs so high. I mean, you just gotta keep grinding and you'll find the right people to do business with.
Well, same question, but let's go back a year.
Yeah.
Like you just launched your company. You've put in a
Uh-huh.
game plan. You've started like making calls. At that point in time, like maybe your first month in, with everything that you know now, what would you go back and tell Zach?
I think I would tell myself, one step at a time. Get one client and, fill that and move on to the next and kind of be more niche. I think, a year ago I had a lot of grand plans, and it takes time and yeah, and I also make sure, hire the right people, get the right marketing scheme going and everything. But yeah, that's probably what I would say.
Awesome. Well, Zach, if anybody wants to follow you, how do they go about doing that?
My LinkedIn, Zach Keen, ZACHKEEN. You could search for me. Our website is keenstaffing.com. So it has our number and email on there. So feel free to reach out through that.
And before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
Not right now. I mean, if you're, interested in the industry or want to talk about, having investors start your company, just reach out. But, I think rising tides lifts all boats. So I appreciate what you're doing, talking to different recruiters and everything. And I think we're in a great industry and a great time. And yeah, I look forward to what the next 5 years have in store.
You know what? I can't wait till we connect again and maybe do another episode in 5 years and you've taken
Yeah,
over like half of
absolutely.
Texas.
Yeah, let's hope so. We'll see.
Let's do it. Well, Zach, I just want to say thank you so much. I know every single person's path is different when it comes to the recruiting game. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about this podcast is, you got some people that are just out of the gate, start a company. You have other people that, you know what? I want a backing of a team. I want a backing of investors. I want a backing of mentors that can really help me get out of the gate properly, start a company that can actually grow. So thank you for coming on, sharing your story. And, because there are, like, I have talked to recruiters that have actually looked for investors and I'm like, I have been like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So this is just another story in the recruiting industry that's here to help. And I want you to absolutely crush 2025, put in the goals, put in the work, put in the, like Zach said, the self-discipline for you to chase your dreams. So go crush it, guys.
This episode is brought to you by Remote Assistants, the go-to partner for recruiters who are done wasting time on operations, sourcing, or marketing. Their remote assistants are pre-vetted and fully trained for an entire 4 months. We're talking sourcing, candidate follow-up, back-end automation, marketing support, all the things that pull you away from actually growing your business. So if you're serious about scaling your agency and want to buy back your time with real plug-and-play talent, go to www.remoteassistance.ai and get matched in under 48 hours.